content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Imagine you're a woman. You're beaten physically and mentally. You're terrified. You don't know what to do. You have nowhere to go. You just know that you got to get you and your children out of there. But where do you go? Who do you call? Who can give you the help that you need? Well, we're going to discuss that with our special guest, David Glass, and go over what you can do and the resources that you have and the protection that you can give yourself if it's just you or you and your children. This is a very important topic that needs to be addressed. So I hope you stick with me. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem Merlot. Well, tonight I wanted to have a guest on to kind of talk about domestic violence. You know, a lot of times domestic violence, it's not just an assault charge. A lot of times there's families involved, children involved. And once the separation happens, what can a woman do and to protect herself and her children from this abuser after she leaves? Many women and children live in fear, like they have to look over their shoulders. So that's why I have special guest David Glass, who is a certified family law specialist and a former psychologist. He is the host of the HourGLASS Podcast, and he's probably best known as handling some A-list celebrities like Mariel Hemingway, Larsa Pippen, and Kelly Rutherford with their family law matters. So without further ado, I have David Glass here. Welcome to the show, David.
Great to be here, Winnie.
Yeah, so the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, we're talking about how the Supreme Court upheld this gun ban to keep guns out of the hands of the abusers. So now, with that being said, what can we do to further this? Is that enough protection? Are these restraining orders enough to protect these women once they leave their abuser?
Yeah, you know what? Restraining orders ultimately are still just a piece of paper with prohibitions on it. And there's not much more you can do, but it is absolutely necessary for someone who has been in any kind of abusive relationship, whether it's physical abuse, emotional, psychological, or here in California, we've even gone so far as to call coercive control a type of abuse where someone controls your access to the outside world or controls your finances in a way that's abusive. It's a forward-looking way that we've changed the law here in California, and hopefully other states will follow. But in any of those cases, you need to get a restraining order because the restraining order will do a number of things. It will prohibit the abuser from coming within 100 yards of you, or your car, or your work, or where you go to school, or your home. It'll prevent the abuser probably from coming close to your children if your children were part of the application as well. It can be used to throw an abuser out of a shared home. If you have a shared rental home or a shared owned home, you can get a kick-out order so that you get to stay in the house with the children, with all your possessions, and this abuser gets kicked out. And then importantly, it prohibits the abuser from having access to guns
Hmm.
any kind of gun. And the abuse, the protection from abuse order, or the domestic violence protective order, gets put into a national system, the CLETS system, that is
Hmm.
available to all police and all gun dealers and all that. So it prevents people from getting new weapons.
Okay.
So it's very important to get the restraining order. The other thing about restraining orders is that it puts you to the top of the list if you call the police and say, this guy or this woman has shown up at my house, I have a protective order against him or her. You need to get over here right away. They put you to the top, and so they come right out. And that can be
Oh, okay.
important in urban areas where sometimes there could be a lag in the response from police.
Right. And so, yeah, this sounds like something that a lot of states should adopt. I would have to do some research to see what other states and laws that they have protecting, because, one thing that I've noticed too, it's like I feel there's not enough shelters for these women to go to, these transitions. Are any of these type of programs, safeguards and stuff for these women and their children, or even men? I mean, men can be abused as well. Is there federal funding at all for programs like this to help these women and get resources so they know what to do post leaving their abuser?
I don't believe there's federal funding, but each of the states enters their own, creates their own laws for domestic violence restraining orders. Most of them are relatively similar, but again, some are more progressive and some are more, maybe to use the term, conservative. But there are
Mhm.
state programs that give money for centers. You can go to a center. They will help you fill out all the paperwork to get a restraining order for free, and they'll sit with you as
Okay.
long as it takes to get that information. There are also state funding for shelters, which are kept confidential, and the address can't be revealed in court papers or anywhere else, where people
Okay.
can reside until they figure out the next possible step in their lives. And that's been put into place for about 10 or maybe even 15 years, because the research showed that a lot of people didn't get restraining orders because they didn't have the money or the connections or the family or friends that they could move in with. And they weren't going to stay in the same home with an
Mhm.
abuser. And if they had nowhere else to live, they were actually putting themselves more at risk potentially by being out on the street. So
Right.
all those changes were made and are available to people. And it's done in most states on a county by county basis. So if
Okay.
whatever county you happen to be in anywhere in the United States, if you put in domestic violence restraining order on a Google search, one of the top 3 responses will be where you can file where they'll help you file the petition, and where the shelters, how you contact the shelters.
Gotcha. Now, since this um, gun ban has been upheld and been in place, has there been a decrease in you know, violence post, once they leave their abuser? Like, is that homicides? Was that very prevalent before this gun ban was put into place? And have you seen a drop in incidences since has been upheld?
Well, it's the ban on abusers having access to purchase or maintain guns has been in place for 10 years, and so
Okay.
we saw a rapid decrease in spousal homicides and spousal abuse with a weapon immediately after it was put in place. The recent Supreme Court case upheld that law. It
Okay.
was, it was something of a surprise from our Supreme Court, which has leaned heavily towards the right or towards the conservative edge. And there
Right.
was a prior court case within about 2 years that said you had to look back in history to the time of the founding fathers. And if you could find a similar limitation on gun possession, then you could have a current law on prohibiting gun possession. And it was a scary proposition, because there were different ideas about spousal abuse and domestic
Right.
violence back in the 1700s. There were completely different ideas about who could own a gun. Everyone owned a gun. Everyone had their property and had to protect it.
Right.
So in this decision, which was an 8-1 decision, a very strong decision, the Supreme Court basically said you don't need a twin. You don't need to go back to the 1700s and find a law that would be a twin to the law now. You just have to look for reasons. And they looked, and in the 1700s, there were laws that prevented certain people, mainly convicts and slaves, from owning weapons. And then the Supreme Court could analogize to, in these situations where an abuser is found to have caused trouble, to be a continuing threat of trouble, you could restrict their access to guns.
Right. And I think that should kind of go across the board with any type of violent assaults, rape, anything like that, because it's a weapon. I mean, obviously you have no problem hurting somebody with a fist or a knife or whatever, and then you put a gun in their hand. Well, what do you think they're going to do with it? Right. And, I can't imagine, like, I've been a victim of domestic abuse during my teen years, which is actually more prevalent than people think. Even back when I was a millennium class. We graduated in 2000. And even back then, I found out a lot of my friends are going through the same thing I was. And being a teenager in that position, I was terrified. I can't imagine what it's like for a woman, especially a woman with children, to have to make the decision to leave. And knowing when I left, and it was just me, I was terrified of repercussions too. I felt like I was always looking over my shoulder. I never pressed charges. I never got that restraining order, and I wish I did. That was one thing I regret not doing. And, as long as women know that there's resources out there for them, they just need to be, they need to be known. I don't think a lot of these resources people are aware of, and I'll definitely find some resources. And if you have any resources, David, I'd be happy to put all those links in today's description for the episode, because I think it's important to make sure, hey, if you need help, reach out to me. I'll find it for you. I have no problem. You can always email me at mysteriesmayhemmerlow@gmail.com, and I'll direct you. And hey, I'll even reach out to you, David. Hey, David, do you have a resource for this? Because it is a community effort. And I feel like I'm one of those people that I have no problem telling my story, because I feel like there is life after abuse. And, but sometimes you just need to find that direction. So what do you want to? Oh, go ahead, David.
I just want to mention that the thing with abuse is there are two types. It breaks down to two types. There's spontaneous abuse. That's normally where people are living together. There's a history of some sort of abuse going on. Oftentimes there's alcohol or drug use involved. And then the last thing is that there's some sort of jealousy issue. And so people abuse in sort of a fit of rage. They displace whatever is bad in their life, and they have to take it out on someone else. Now that's oversimplifying things, but by moving out and getting a restraining order, you take away all of that spontaneous abuse, which is the highest percentage. And the other type is more of a premeditated type of abuse. So someone is jealous or greedy. Those are their motives, or they want to continue to control someone, and then they plan and plot to do something. Those are less common, and oftentimes they're sort of done in a very disorganized fashion. It's still a risk, and that's the risk that exists even after someone moves out. So even after separation, you've moved out, you're in your new place. Even if you're in a different part of the state or a different state, you still should get a restraining order, because there's the chance that the person who has lost this control through the abusive relationship is going to miss that and want to re-engage.
Right. And, and God forbid, but this crossed my mind too when I was going through the abuse. It's like, if I had a restraining order at the time, if God forbid, if something were to happen to me, then there's some record of somebody that you know what I mean? Like there's record of somebody that has been bothering me, that has shown violence towards me, that, stalking me, whatever. So that would be a quick way for police to kind of identify a suspect as well, and make sure that they apprehend the perpetrator as soon as possible. I hate to say that, but there are a lot of cases like that where once they split, the husband has that notion, if I can't have you, nobody will. And a lot of times it ends badly. And, and I think having laws like this are so important.
Mhm.
Now, is there anything that we can do as a society help kind of spearhead this to become even a better law?
Yeah, I think the law offers all the protection it can in terms of the things I talked about. The issue is making it known to
Mhm.
every person, every citizen, every person walking the streets of the town you live in, that abuse isn't to be tolerated, that abuse is not just a punch or a kick or being pushed into a wall. It's much more subtle things: emotional abuse, constant calling names, belittling, psychological
Mhm.
abuse, the whole area of gaslighting, where people abusers make their victims start to doubt their own thoughts and their own beliefs. And
Right.
then the coercive control, where they tightly control who they can talk to, where they can spend money. Here's $20. Go to the market, but I want the receipts to see what you spent that $20 on.
Mhm.
So it's more of an education campaign so that everyone knows that, first of all, these things are intolerable. Secondly, that there are resources that you can utilize to get out from under someone like this.
Mhm.
And it cuts across socioeconomic classes. It's not just people in the lower socioeconomic status, poor people. It's not just rich people. It's people across the full spectrum who don't know about these laws and don't know what's available to them.
Right, and I think that's important for people to know, and that's why I was glad to have you on, 'cause I'm like, I had no idea about this law and how much protection these women actually have. I mean, I wish I would have known this, back in
Yeah,
what was it, 97, 98? God, it's so
yeah,
long ago. But yeah, and it's important to let these women know, like I said, there is life after abuse. I know it sounds scary to be on the other side, but you want to know what the other side is great. I'm just letting you know. I know it sounds scary, but it can happen. But yeah, you need those resources and the knowledge, and because I wish like I said, I wish, and it makes me sad. I wish I would have known all this back when I was dealing with this, because it would have made my life so much better, I think.
mhm.
But I think it's important that have people now. Do you talk about this on your podcast as well, or is it your podcast kind of separate thing from what you talk about when it comes to like laws and things like that?
Yeah, I have talked about it in seasons 1 and seasons 2. We're now working on season 6. We had a number of experts, from lawyers and psychologists and public health officials, talking about basically divorce law, what you could do, what you couldn't do. We had people talking about prenuptial agreements, but we had several different episodes about just plain old domestic violence, how you get a restraining order. We had 2 or 3 episodes about gaslighting, to really explain to
Okay.
people, when someone is messing with your mind and completely controlling you, and you start to doubt yourself, you have to hold out hope. You've got to go talk to someone else and say, does this sound strange to you? Because the person will say,
Right.
that's ridiculous, that this person's trying to warp your mind. But you need
Mhm.
to know about it first, to then possibly ask a friend, or seek the help to get out from under that person.
Yeah, and actually what I'll do is in the description, I'll kind of highlight those episodes, and that way people have a quick access to those in case they want to learn about gaslighting. If they're, trust me, I know what gaslighting is, because you're like literally sitting there, you're like, am I doing something wrong? What am I doing? It's like, it must be me. I must be doing something to make him mad because he's angry all the time. And yeah, I totally get it. And that disassociation that you have with yourself, it gets to the point where you look in the mirror, you don't even recognize the person you're looking at.
Right.
And I really had that issue disassociating myself during the abuse. And but since we talked about your podcast, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, I want to kind of highlight the Hourglass podcast,
Mhm.
because I know it's not technically true crime, but I think it's very important, especially when it comes to abuse. You have inspirational people telling their stories about life after abuse, life after alcoholism, just kind of positive stories. And it was all kind of based on your book, Moving On, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce. So, and I've been divorced, so I totally get it. But we're going to talk about that once we take the break, and we'll see you here in a bit. Did you know that radio just got a little extraterrestrial? That's right, Dave Schrader is back on radio with the Paranormal 360 every Sunday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Central on WCCO AM 830, an Odyssey station. Just download the Odyssey app and look for the WCCO logo, follow the station, and listen live. That's the Paranormal 360 on WCCO AM 830, an Odyssey station.
Oh, my little darklings, Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness is out, and it's available right now. And I would love for you to pick up a copy of my brand new book. You can get it on Amazon wherever you live in this great, big, wonderful world of ours. Or if you'd like to get an autographed copy and you live here in the United States, go to paranormal60.com. We have the standard copy, non-autographed, just $20. Signed copy, only $30. And not only do we have this book, but we have my other book, The Other Side. And right now I'm running a special. If you pick up both books, you can get both books for $40, both signed. Both will be shipped in one package for one price. So go check out all the information at paranormal60.com. The Other Side, a teen's guide to ghost hunting and the paranormal, which is a guide on ghost hunting and the paranormal. Or you can get Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness, real life encounters with the supernatural. And not only are they some of my all-time favorite stories from you, but there's a few of my favorite stories that have happened to me in the book as well. So go check it out, paranormal60.com, to order your copies, or you can buy copies wherever you are in the world that are unsigned at amazon.com. And I'll ask you this. Many of you have supported me in buying this book already. If you could just take 30 seconds to rate and review this book on Goodreads or on amazon.com, I would greatly appreciate it, because the more we get of good ratings and reviews, the more they expose this book to a wider, bigger audience. So I would appreciate that as a personal favor to me, your pal, Dave Schrader.
Okay, and we're back from break. And before the break, we were talking with David about his podcast, the HourGLASS Podcast, which you said you're in the sixth season of it already, or you're starting the sixth season?
Yeah, we're just starting to film. We filmed 2 episodes of it. It's not gonna premiere, I think, until October, when we have the full set done.
So with the podcast, you kind of like, is it based off of just like kind of life after divorce, or is it just kind of life after anything that can change, shake up your world, I guess you would say. So what kind of content do you guys talk about?
Yeah, so it started off, I wrote the book Moving On, Reconfiguring Your Life After Divorce. Because when I got divorced, which is now 15 years ago, I looked for a book. All right, now I got divorced. There's plenty of books about the nuts and bolts of divorce, how you find a lawyer, how you divide property, how child support is calculated. I couldn't find a book that talked about, well, what do I do with myself now? And so it took me a while to write it, but I eventually wrote it, and it's broken down into a number of chapters, each on a subject. So one subject is getting your emotional health back, and that's the first thing you should focus on. The next thing is figuring out where you want to live, and then looking at your finances. Who are going to be your friends? Who's going to be your next potential partner? And there's even a chapter on trying to blend families if your new partner has their own children from a prior relationship. So it takes a problem-solving approach. So it gives you very concrete tips. This is what you need to do to figure these things out. And it gives people a very simple way of saying, I've got a problem. What are the possible solutions for it? Now let me look down all these possible solutions, and which one am I going to try first? Because a lot of problems with problem solving after an emotional or traumatic experience is just making a choice. Sometimes you're too scared to even make a choice. And I focus on it over and over again. Just make a choice. There's no crime in making the right choice. You say, I want to fix this. I pick option 3. It doesn't work. turn around and go back to your list and now pick option 2 or 4 or 7. You just got to keep working at it. So then I turned that into a podcast, and I focused the first several seasons just on experts, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, the psychologists, who talked about these various things that I talked about in the book. And then we started expanding it to what other things are there out there. So I interviewed people who have a destruction room. If you have some anger and you want to go somewhere, they have things you can smash. They have a car you can beat up with a sledgehammer. We talked to a meditation expert about how to calm yourself and how to get past some of the negative emotions. And then in the last 2 seasons, we focused more on the commonality between everyday people and the people we call celebrities or people in the know, that they have a lot of the same problems that all of us also have. And we decided to focus on that because sometimes it just makes people feel better that, oh, this person's wildly famous. This person had a career in music, and he or she went through the same things that I'm going through. There was a recent news article about Miss Kansas, the woman who became Miss Kansas for the Miss America pageant. And she came out and said, when she received her crown, I was abused, and the person who abused me showed up in the audience today. And it was a very powerful speech, because she said, I've gotten past this person. He showed up to try and disrupt my win here, and I'm just not going to let it happen. And the importance of that was, again, this is someone, she was a ER nurse and went through a beauty pageant. She's had the same problems that people who sweep up or people who serve food, anyone can possibly have. So so we've been focusing on these on musicians. In season 6, we're turning to TV and movie folks, so directors and writers, photography, directors of photography, and we're asking them about their own experiences. And if you approach people in the right way, in a kind and gentle way, they will share their stories. As traumatic as they were, people want to share their stories and help other people. And so that's what we're focusing on right now.
Yeah, and that's why I've talked about my story of abuse, because I feel like if I don't say something, I'm not helping. I'm not, and it kind of helps heal me too through the process. Yeah. And the whole what really kind of launched me going public with my abuse that I went through was the Gabby Petito incident, where they said that they saw her being pulled through the window of the van.
Yeah.
And that happened to me. And it just like struck a chord with me so hard. And I was just like, I'm Gabby Petito. I could have been that. I could have been her, because that's what happened. He pulled me through the window of the van and he brought me out in the middle of nowhere. I live in Minnesota, and it was January at 1:00 in the morning, and it was really, really cold out, and he wanted to kick me out of the van and leave me there to freeze. And I was terrified, and that really struck a chord with me. And that's why I have to start publicly talking about it, because I feel if I get it out there, if it just resonates with one person, and that gives them the courage to call a helpline or something, I feel like I'm doing my job. And and having having people like you have on your podcast and highlighting those issues and saying, hey, abuse issues, depression, none of that stuff, it's not, it doesn't pick and choose. It's, it hits everybody across the spectrum, from, just blue collar workers to A-list celebrities to the president of the United States. We're all affected by it. And I'm really glad there's people like you kind of highlighting that and saying, hey, we all have our ugly moments. We all have our skeletons in the closet, but hey, let's talk about it, work through it, and you might learn something, right? The website is the HourGlassPodcast.com, and I'll have all those links in today's description guide. Thank you so much, David, for joining me today. This has been very enlightening, and I feel like I'm going to try and do my best. I don't know how much I could reach, but I'll do my best to kind of spearhead this and get this into social media and say, hey, this needs to be known, and we need to help these women find some resources at an easy and quick way. I wish there was some type of website where just one website you can plug in your information and go, boom, here's the list of resources for you. But hey, and if anybody feels scared or hesitant to do anything, if you want to email me or even contact you, David, since you have a lot of resources too. If people can email you and say, hey, this is my situation, can you give me a resource? I'd be happy to help people, because that's why I do this podcast. It's very important to me. So thank you so much, David, for joining me. And we'll definitely, hey, if there's any other updates or anything, reach out to me if there's a new law that comes out or something that, with the election coming up, could any of this kind of be reversed? I hope not. But those kind of things scare me, and we need stuff like this in place. So thank you so much. Again, the website is the HourGLASS Podcast, and I'll have a link in today's program guide. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.